Okay, hi again everyone. So in this video we're going to just have a quick run through of the analysis of stanza 2 in visiting hour. This is for the National 5 and the higher students. So again, as I've been saying all the way through, this isn't intended to just provide answers to you, to just essentially be a set of notes but in spoken form. The point here is to sort of guide you through the key bits of the poem so that the set of notes that you end up producing are going to be sort of full and detailed and insightful enough to get you the sort of marks that you deserve when we get to things like critical essays eventually kind of down the road. So stanza 2. What seems a corpse is trundled into a lift and vanishes heavenward. We know from stanza 1 that that was about his initial reaction into the hospital, about sort of how he felt sort of being confronted with it again, what that suggested about whether it was a first visit or not, whether it might be a last visit, all that kind of stuff. In stanza 2, we're seeing him going a little bit further into the hospital. So the kind of things that we saw in stanza 1 are then developing further. Stanza 1 ended with a focus on sickness and ill health with the green and yellow corridors. Stanza 2 takes that to its sort of next stage, because what we see here really is a speaker who seems completely unable to get death out of his head. Now that should obviously tell you something about the visit, and in particular, because everything we're seeing is through the speaker's eyes, it's always the speaker's perspective, it should tell you something about the speaker's expectations for the visit that he's on, and that's obviously very, very important. So what seems a corpse is trundled into a lift and vanishes heavenwards. All of this is focused on death. You've got what seems a corpse, so that kind of comparison there. And there's a few things I've actually, I've put as imagery, but you could equally talk about the word choice of corpse, which is sort of detached, clinical, medical type of word, that maybe tells you something about the speaker's attempts to sort of to hold back his emotions, to stay detached, which we then go on to see in the next stanza. But the fact it seems a corpse tells you that, or I mean, that on its own seems a corpse, but the fact is also during visiting hour, is it likely to be a dead person being moved through the hospital at this point in full view of visitors? It seems very, very unlikely. But to him, he sees a bed getting moved, and maybe there's somebody on it. Maybe there's a patient who's alive. Maybe there's somebody who's not very well. Maybe it's a pile of sheets. You don't know. But to him, the assumption is that it's someone who's died, because that's the only thing on his mind right now. The word choice of trundled is interesting, because that kind of confirms that this is unlikely to be a patient or a person at all, really. Trundled's a word you'd associate with a shopping trolley in a supermarket car park. It's not a word that you would hope would be associated with a person being moved about a hospital, respectively. So reinforcing this idea of it just seeming to be a corpse. You've got the word vanishes as well, which is obviously sort of suggesting the idea of like complete disappearance, of total loss. So the body, or the whatever it is, goes into the lift, which then starts moving up the way. But to use vanishes instead of moves, for example, suggests this idea, as I say, of complete disappearance, and it's once again shown as this idea of death and loss and grief being sort of swirling around his mind. And it ends with this thing about heavenwards, which is really, really important. So with heavenward, obviously, I mean, it could just mean upwards. Physically, that's what the lift is doing. But he hasn't used upwards, doesn't use and vanishes upwards, it uses heavenwards. And it's quite clear why, but you need to be able to explain it effectively. The word heaven we would obviously associate with death, and the word ward we would associate with a hospital. The fact that those two words have been sort of pushed together and linked together into a single word might suggest to you, for example, that those two ideas are now connected in the speaker's head as well. So where heaven and ward, so death and hospital, are together on the page, what does that tell you about the speaker's state of mind at this point in the visit, and what can that then help you to understand about, again, expectations for the visit itself? What can it help you to understand about the relationship between the characters, things like that. Okay, so that's stanza 2, and after this, unsurprisingly, we'll go on to stanza 3.